Good morning and welcome to CBC Radio Canada's 10th annual public meeting. Very exciting. We are broadcasting live from Edmonton, Alberta, from the beautiful art gallery of Alberta, a wonderful space, and this is a great opportunity for all of us to engage with Canadians right across the country who are joining us right now. So my name is Andrew Chang. I will be your co-host today. My day job, or night job, I guess you could call it. I am a co-host of The National, but hey, this is fun too. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, so hello to everyone who's joining us online and on Facebook as well. And yeah, looking forward to having an interesting dialogue, a meaningful conversation about diversity and inclusion.
Et c'est un plaisir pour moi de travailler avec toi aujourd'hui, Andrew, un journaliste.
It is a great pleasure for me to be with you, Andrew, a serious journalist, whereas I come from the music sector. We are here at the Art Gallery of Edmonton to meet with you on this 10th year. This 10th edition of the annual public meeting. This is my first meeting, and I think we're going to have some very enriching discussions. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you because we're broaching subjects that are sometimes thorny or delicate and on which people have very entrenched ideas. And so it'll be interesting to see how things have evolved. And so I am very pleased to welcome members of the Board of Directors of CBC Radio Canada, as well as members from senior management. Welcome to all. Now, over the next few minutes, there will be some very great introductions to some of our favorite figures from CBC Radio Canada. They'll be joining us on stage. They will be here with us to add their voices to the discussion on how to protect and how to promote our culture, as well as speak on all issues concerning diversity and how to leverage inclusion. As individuals, as people, as leaders within our respective communities. And I hope that our discussions are going to be very rich. And I also hope that we find some avenues of solutions. And what I also hope is that one day we will no longer need to talk about such subjects and that it's going to be taken for granted.
And how sometimes these can be delicate issues. That does not mean we're going to shy away from the issues, and we want all of you to get involved, right? We want this to be as interactive as possible. So to do that online is going to be a great way. You can use hashtags, hashtag CBC Listens or hashtag Radio Canada vous écoute. Both are good. You can use either one. CBC Listens is a little bit shorter. Just saying. Look, I'm one of those guys who tweets like right down to the last character, right? So you can use Radio Canada vous écoute. CBC Listens is shorter. But yeah, anytime on Facebook, also on Twitter, please get involved. We are going to have a live Q&A. Because we have our very own social media presenters sticking with us right now, Mark Connolly and May Anderson. Mark, of course, you know as the host of Edmonton AM. You know Mel and May Anderson of EC Alberta are their very own social media ambassador. Hello, guys.
Salut, bonjour.
Hello. So they'll be with us. They'll be watching the Facebook feed, watching Twitter, watching the hashtags to make sure that we include as many questions as humanly possible. And of course, as I said, after the panel, we'll do a Q&A with everyone here in the room, where we'll try to get some questions in.
Et avant de commencer les discussions,
So just before starting our discussions, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are assembled here on the territory of Treaty 6, which is of great significance for the Métis. And it is my great pleasure to invite Eugene Makokis, an elder from the Cree Nation of Saddle Lake, to make an opening prayer before we begin this assembly.
You can go to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. It's a good day, it's a good morning. I've been given tobacco to do a prayer this morning, and that's the protocol. I'm glad to be here. My name is Eugene Makokis. I'm from Saddle Lake First Nations. I'm from Treaty 6, and Edmonton here is part of Treaty 6, where we're at. So we're all here for one purpose, I guess. We all want to be winners. So in my prayers, I'm going to use the English word win at the end of my words. Ksewatsuan is kind, Pahtemun humble, Sagituan love one another. Also, it's good to be with laughter. You know, we can't always be serious. It's we call that we have to go soon. So those are some of the words I want to say in my prayer. Also, we're here to learn Slamat Suan and understanding Stutamuin. So that's what I'm going to do this morning, to pray so that everything is good. I see that also there's 4 races here, which is good. We're all trying to work together, and so everything goes right. And in Cree, 4 is a very symbolic number. We pray in 4 directions. There's 4 seasons, 4 stages of life. Can go on and on with our teachings here, but I'm just going to leave it at that. Now I'm going to pray my language. Haumamo tawi mo ksewatsi. Gnanaskun numano skutakis gao yutsabah taman. Kutakis gao yawin. Kahkyo utakapi tuhtejik sawin. Kapmyuk muhtejik binite gao tuhtejik. Angin mingi teganak. Kaginagataga kipniming pixquistmaga. Newe kapistoya sundik no humtik. Which you won't on up to I come up Sema, Sagito, Vichito, Kakiogone, and I scoop none some Tawiba, the Patemo Negote, De Egote, Xewat so Negote, Gaze Gaxewatsi, Gigak Sewate, Tabakiogi. And give me the bagno, I see no Nanto a week check. And we take on Nagmina, my meat said the one on Nego, everything mean. Some is Kagis put that on us, kicks a pap, Uma, a notes. So Amen, hi.
Thank you very much for that. Now I would like to welcome, I was going to say Jeff Goldblum, Michael Goldblum, Chair of CBC Radio Canada's Board of Directors. Give him a round of applause as he comes up.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, Jeff Goldblum, I wish. Thank you, Andrew. Merci, Myriam. Hello, everyone. Bonjour, tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone.
Joining us here in Edmonton for our 10th annual public meeting. And a special thank you to the Art Gallery of Alberta for welcoming us in this truly gorgeous building. I want to also welcome everyone who's joining us online. CBC Radio-Canada est votre diffuseur public. Il est essentiel.
CBC Canada is a public broadcaster. It is absolutely critical for us to exchange with you so that we can listen to what you have to say about the services that we offer.
Our various platforms are designed to inform, to enlighten and entertain, but also to allow us to exchange and learn about the different perspectives and views of Canadians. It is that dialogue with Canadians that allows the public broadcaster to differentiate itself from the others and to truly serve as a public space for Canadians. The CBC Radio-Canada Board of Directors has a stewardship responsibility, an oversight responsibility, mais beaucoup plus important.
But more importantly, we have the privilege and the responsibility to represent our citizens.
Help our public broadcaster to fulfill its mandate to Canadians. So I'm honored to have been asked to chair the board and have been doing
C'est mon honneur.
last April. We are very fortunate to have an extraordinary group of men and women on the board of CBC Radio-Canada. I wish I had the time to be able to tell you a bit about each one of them. They come from across the country and bring enormous experience and expertise to this role that we all share. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I would suggest that if you're interested, you should go on our website and you can learn a bit more about them. But I am going to ask if they would just stand up and be recognized. So Guillaume Niorté de Montréal, Ted Boyd from Toronto, Harley Finkelstein from Ottawa, Suzanne Guevremont de Montréal, Rob Jeffrey from Halifax, René Légère de Moncton, Jennifer Moore-Rattray from Winnipeg, Sandra Singh from Vancouver, and Marie Wilson from Yellowknife. So these are the great men and women who have volunteered their time to be of support to CBC Radio-Canada, and I want to thank them all for being here and for their efforts. Thank you. So this is a period of significant disruption and change for the media. What has not changed and what must not change is the trust that Canadians have in CBC Radio-Canada. Nous sommes en très bonne...
We are in very good hands in that respect because we have a new CEO who is going to be an exceptional leader for our corporation. Her experience, her passion for Canadian content, and her leadership skills are exactly what CBC Radio-Canada needs to embark on the changes ahead.
I think as all Canadians should be, that Catherine Tate has agreed to take on this role, and I'm going to ask Catherine if she would come forward and address us.
Thank you, Michael. I'm also delighted to be in Edmonton. This is my first visit to this wonderful city, so it's very exciting. And we just came from meeting all the CBC and Radio-Canadien at the offices here, and fabulous team. So welcome to all of you to the 10th annual public meeting, my first. Since I started at CBC Radio-Canada in July, I've been on a listening and learning tour. I've met with employees and stakeholders in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Thunder Bay, and Iqaluit, Vancouver yesterday, Calgary tomorrow. And what I really want to get from this tour is your ideas and your thoughts about what we're doing right and what we may not be doing right enough for you as Canadians. So we need your feedback. It's critical to us, and as Michael said, these are changing times for media, and really the public broadcaster has never been more important. And so we want to be serving you, and your opinion matters to us. Canadians depend on us for reliable information about their communities and the world in a respectful and civilized manner. We're here to engage with you, and we want Canadians to be able to continue to engage with each other. So I think of programs like CBC Edmonton's investigative series Into Pure North. That was a 14-month investigation into how public money was being spent and what it could mean to people's health here. It triggered government action. The series was nominated for the prestigious Michener Award for Public Service Journalism. And that's precisely what it is, great public service journalism in your community. Je pense naturellement à Radio-Canada Alberta, un service indispensable.
I can think of Radio-Canada Alberta, which is an indispensable service for Franco-Albertans. And it serves a great number of Francophones throughout the country. We believe that there are many Francophones outside of Quebec, as well as Anglophone Quebecers, must have access to media that tells their stories. I'd also like to highlight that the team for Alberta, Franco-Alberta, will be receiving a prize from the Federation of Francophones for its work on global development and promotion of the Albertan Francophonie. Warm congratulations to the team, and bravo.
This is your public broadcaster, serving Canadians through 88 radio stations, 27 television stations, 41 regional websites, incredibly popular podcasts, over 16 million downloads every month, a new CBC Kids news service on a digital platform, CBC North, which serves communities across the territories and northern Quebec, and two amazing streaming services, Tout.tv and most recently relaunched GEM. Ce que je retiens de mes conversations.
And what I retain from my conversations with Canadians is that our mandate is to inform and enlighten and entertain Canadians, and it's more relevant than ever. Yes, our future is a digital one. That's where Canadians can be reached and found.
In the midst of modernizing its broadcasting and telecommunications acts for today's media landscape. We're a big part of this inquiry. And I want to hear from you, from people across the country, what you value about public broadcasting and what we can do better in the future. L'important, c'est que vous
What is significant is that you see yourselves in your public broadcaster. And this is what leads me to our focal point today of our annual public meeting, diversity and inclusion. It's something that's important to each and every one of us. But above all else, it is critical for the public broadcaster. We must absolutely embody these values in order to properly serve Canadians.
Ensure that all Canadians are heard on our airwaves and digital platforms, that you and your children see yourselves reflected on your public broadcaster. So far this year, we've been able to hire more Indigenous people, members of visible minorities, and persons with disabilities. And in fact, our new diversity hires make up 27.2% of our workforce in the first quarter of the year. These are our best numbers since we started tracking this performance measure. So I should acknowledge Monique and all the team for all the members of management that are here that have been working on this very, very important objective. Oh, I should say, here we go. We're also a leader in gender parity among Canadian media. 48.9% of our employees are women. I think I may be the most recent hire.
But the figures don't say it all. If we want to be your public broadcaster, we have to bring together a variety of talent which reflects the richness of this country, the plethora of opinions and experiences and diversity of our fellow Canadians.
2018-2021 Diversity and Inclusion Plan. It sets clear objectives, targets, and a plan to get there. It will build on what we've been doing, and it will make our content, our workplace culture, and our workforce better. Je veux entendre ce que vous avez à dire, mais avant...
I want to hear what you have to say, but before starting the discussion, I wish to convey my deep thanks to our hosts, Andrew Chang from The National and Myriam Firmu from Ici Musica.
In advance, our panel today, Paul, Padmine, Patricia, and James, who will be sharing their views on inclusivity and storytelling. I'm so looking forward to this discussion. Merci beaucoup. À très bientôt.
Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Jeff. I mean, Michael Gold. So, okay, we are just about ready to get started. So this is very exciting. We're going to introduce the panel in just a moment, and we're going to be discussing how to enrich our cultural experience, right, by becoming more inclusive. And there are so many questions around that, right? I mean, how do we need to think about diversity and inclusion? And if we get that right, how does that help us become a stronger community, a stronger organization, a stronger national public broadcaster? These are all big questions. So we will dive into it. Just take a look at this.
Around the world, our Canadian identity is growing.
Notre identité canadienne rayonne de plus en plus partout dans le monde.
As your public broadcaster, we are committed to continuing to reflect Canada and all the things that make us unique.
En tant que diffuseur public, nous nous engageons à être à l'image du Canada et de ce qui nous rend uniques.
CBC Radio Canada is woven into the fabric of our country, rooted in the communities we serve, and committed to sharing stories as Canadians live them, each and every day.
CBC Radio-Canada reste ancré dans les communautés et nous avons à cœur le fait de montrer les réalités des Canadiens jour après jour.
Happy Canada Day, everyone! We're living in a multicultural country. It is so inspiring.
Your voice matters.
Faites-vous entendre.
The CBC Vancouver Science Fair has been awesome.
L'inclusion, c'est accepter l'autre et échanger avec l'autre.
Everyone wants to feel like they belong.
L'idéal serait que tout le monde ici s'implique.
We are a broadcaster for everybody.
En racontant les histoires qui comptent le plus, les vôtres.
With the stories that matter the most. Yours.
Et voilà, pendant les dernières secondes.
So in the final seconds, the room and the stage became filled with people who are going to give us their various viewpoints.
Alors, je vous présente.
So I'm going to introduce you to, starting at the right, Padmini Chundan Singh, who is president of the Fédération des Francophones de la Colombie-Britannique, which a position she's been in since June 2015 after being a member of the board and serving the organization in this capacity for 8 years. Padmini comes to us from Vancouver today. I lived a few years in Vancouver, so I know that you play a key role in BC.
Let's give her a round of applause. Just beside her, we have an award-winning actor, writer, comedian, Paul Sun-Hyung. That's a mouthful. Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, who we all know, I suppose, as Mr. Kim Appa to some, in CBC's own Kim's Convenience. So thank you for being here. And I know, for a long time you've talked often about being typecast in certain roles and how you hope that this show, Kim's Convenience, will be the beginning of Canada opening the gates to more diverse programming. So thank you to Paul for being here.
Et je vous présente maintenant.
And I'd like to introduce Patricia Bitu Chikudi, who comes from Manitoba, where she's a journalist, a reporter with Radio-Canada. She arrived via Montreal and immigrated to Canada at the age of 11 as a refugee from the Congo. And she wants to inspire young immigrants to work in the media. I'm sure it's going to be very inspiring to hear what she has to say. Welcome, Patricia.
At least we have Dr. James Makokis, a two-spirited family physician from Saddle Lake, Cree Nation, and you also practice in Kihiuwin and Enoch, Cree Nations as well. Also a teacher who co-teaches Indigenous health courses at Yellowhead Tribal College, and a lot of his work has been focused on finding ways to integrate Indigenous knowledge into programming of all kinds in Indigenous nations. And of course, that includes working collaboratively with traditional medicine practitioners. So Dr. Makokis, thanks so much.
Je rappelle à ceux qui nous suivent sur la web.
So on the webcast, you can take part in this discussion through social media. So the hashtag is CBC Listens in English, Radio-Canada vous écoute in French, or as Andrew says, CBC Listens is a little shorter. You can also use Facebook. Mark Connolly and May Anderson, our hosts, will be passing on your questions throughout our meeting today. Thank you so much for being with us.
I can't wait to hear what their experiences have been like with some of the themes, like this. Okay, so Padmine, maybe I'd like to start with you because, and I'll start with what is perhaps my fear about all of this, and that is, I mean, diversity and inclusion. My fear is that these become buzzwords, right? That we sort of just assume that these are good in and of themselves without really thinking about why they're important. So maybe if you could share your point of view on that. I mean, why inclusion and diversity are so important.
Diversity is something I always say. I'm an immigrant. I come from Mauritius. I'm part of a minority. It's very important. When we arrive in Canada, we come with different cultures, different languages, different ways of eating, different ways of speaking. So diversity is something really, really important. Everyone must know that when newcomers arrive, they need to be welcomed, they need to be respected. And so we talk about diversity, but sometimes we really don't see that there is the inclusion aspect as well. When we come to Canada, we need this support. We need to be part of the community. We need to know that we belong, that people respect us. If people come here, it's to contribute to the development of Canada. It's very important for me that the inclusion be there for anyone, any community that comes to Canada. There's a lot of work yet to do. This awareness needs to be raised. You talked about buzzwords in English, and these expressions like diversity and inclusion, we can go beyond the buzzwords and say, well, diversity is important, we all need it, but what's a concrete example, perhaps? Perhaps I'll ask you, James. I'm wondering, you're a family physician, you're from the Saddle Lake Nation, a Cree Nation, and I'm wondering how you mix your traditional or your allopathic skills with traditional medicine, the traditional medicine of your people.
I wanted to start out in Cree, in our own language, which is the language of this continent and this territory here, so thank you. Part of that question is, you're asking about medicine, and the original medicine of this continent, of Turtle Island, is Neheo-Maskikia, which is Cree medicines. Western medicine is a medicine that was introduced here. And so when Big Bear, who was the signatory to Treaty for Treaty 6, asked for those medicines to be included into our treaty, he knew that we would need them in the future. And part of that was to help with the illnesses that would be brought here that didn't exist here before, that our people didn't have the medicines for. And so for our people to actually heal and get better from Western sicknesses, we need some Western medicines. For our people to heal and get better from emotional sicknesses or social sicknesses of colonization, which is manifested in the media and various news broadcasts and things like that that are shown and descripted about Indigenous people, those need Indigenous medicines, those need Indigenous healers, those need elders. And we need to work to include those into the healthcare system because right now they're very much marginalized. And so in practicing and creating a space in my own clinic, in the communities that I work, it's opening that up and really living our treaty the way that we were supposed to, which is having both medicines, both education systems, learning about each other, and working together like my father talked about at the beginning. And it's creating that space when we have the opportunity to do so and making that space when it's not available.
And yet, you know, I'm sure that there are a whole host of challenges in actually accomplishing that, right? I mean, vous sentez de la pression, you must feel pressure to defend it in some ways, and I do want to talk more about the challenges that we face as we get into the next section. But Paul, maybe I'll swing this over to you because, you know, I think back to March 2018, and two things to me stand out as they relate to you: the Canadian Screen Awards. So first of all, congratulations, you won Best Actor in a Comedy Series at the Canadian Screen Awards. And this was his exact reaction, too, when he learned that he won when he was up on stage. But I remember you went up on stage, and you went on to deliver what I thought, and what I think a lot of people thought of as a very powerful statement. And you started with the words, "Representation matters." And I'm wondering if you can explain that for us. I mean, how representation matters.
Thank you very much, Andrew. First of all, I didn't expect to win, which is why I had that look on my face, because there's a wealth of talent in this country, and I really am truly humbled by the fact that I got that award. But representation for me is a very personal thing, especially as an actor of color, because the opportunities afforded to me were not there as afforded to what's the word there? my fellow actors who were Caucasian, basically. They had more opportunities than I did, just point of fact. The stories that were available to me, the types of shows I was able to audition for, even though I'd been raised in Canada, even though I spoke completely unaccented English, producers, directors, whoever, the decision makers couldn't see me in that role because of the color of my skin. I learned to speak English by watching television. When my parents immigrated here, they both had to work, and so the TV was my babysitter. And so I always grew up with that medium sort of in the background. And for me, when you watch shows that reflect a culture that you're not part of, what happens is you start to believe that your culture isn't as important, that your stories don't matter, that your stories are the outliers, there's not a commonality there to it. And so it wasn't until a show like Kim's Convenience sort of came along and I saw this story, and it was suddenly my parents, my family, my life reflected up on a screen. It was such a powerful moment for me because I'd never ever seen that before. And the thing that we realized was when audiences started to watch it and they really started to enjoy it, that they could find a way to sort of connect, and they found empathy with it, and they understood it, and they were able to see a part of their society that that was never sort of shown before. And it is empowering because when you don't have a voice and suddenly you see yourself reflected up there, it feels like people are starting to listen. And that's when change starts to happen, when people start to listen. When you stop doing the same old, and you start exploring more dynamic, more, just unbefore explored stories that you really, really do get to really enjoy the richness of the different cultures that make up this country. And I do believe that diversity is is one of the strengths of this country. Because we are so welcoming. I mean, growing up, I always heard that we are a multicultural society, not a melting pot, but a multicultural society. And so we should embrace these quote-unquote differences, but really the wonderful thing is we find that when we see each other reflected, that we're not that much different to begin with, and that we can have cultural differences, but we can have that cultural, that human understanding that family is family, and so I just sort of spoke to that because I never once thought in a million years I'd be the lead on a television series, on a public broadcaster, for me, CBC growing up, I mean, and I'm going to be quite, for me, the joke was it's the Caucasian Broadcasting Corporation because I never saw my family reflected up there. And so I'm so proud now that our show is not only just the Korean Canadian comedy, it is the Canadian comedy that everybody is relating to. And that's a point of pride for all of us on the show.
Je pense qu'on peut aller.
I think now we can go towards social media. Just check in with our social media to see whether there's any comments. Well, right now we're just waiting for people to submit questions. Don't hesitate. The hashtag is Radio-Canada vous écoute, CBC listens in English. And we're still waiting. I have a question, and I'd like to ask Patricia, just to come back to what Paul said, this idea that it's virtually unreachable to work with CBC or for CBC when you come from a community of diversity. So I was born in the Congo. I showed up or you came from the Congo, I'm sorry. And you came with a dream. You came at the age of 11. How did you develop these models, and how do we develop them for young people to inspire them, to keep their dreams alive? Yes, we need to be examples. People who come in from the outside need models, need to see themselves reflected. As Paul said, for him, CBC meant Caucasian Broadcasting Corporation. That's what the C stood for. So whether it be in entertainment or news or anything, we need the diversity. We need to see the anything, series, we need to see ourselves reflected there. We think about the color of my skin, but it's a lot more than that, especially in 2018. Diversity is reflected in terms of the type of content, the subject matter, and also having a presence on air that's different. For instance, there are people who think about the content of each program, and those people who do the thinking need to represent diversity. They need to have that vision. You need people around the table. You need around the table people who have this experience. So to see oneself represented in the media and TV, yes, that's important, but you have to have people behind the scenes, producers, directors who are part of that diversity, because then they're going to be looking for stories that are different and that really reflect the diversity that is Canada.
All four of our panelists. Now we're going to get into the hard stuff, I think. Let's go to the challenges.
Ah oui, les défis, on va essayer de les surmonter ensemble. Et j'ai envie d'avoir votre point de vue là-dessus, Padminé. Ça fait, on l'a dit d'entrée de jeu, plusieurs années que vous travaillez à intégrer les nouveaux arrivants. Si on retourne une douzaine d'années en arrière, comment le travail a évolué et comment vous avez vu les communautés autour de vous se mobiliser pour faire...
How have you seen the communities become engaged? And, well, my personal experience when I arrived in Canada, and I arrived about 15 years ago. I'm from Mauritius. I'm Canadian, Mauritian immigrant. So it wasn't an easy experience. Had to start at square one, basically, and move through the ranks. But with communities, and I'm talking about BC and Francophone minorities in BC, we have associations that greet these people, greet newcomers. We work a lot with immigration to lend a lot more visibility and to really welcome newcomers to Canada, not only in BC, but everywhere. And this is really important because, as I said, we come with different cultures, and even in Mauritius, it's a different culture, it's a different community, so we have to adapt to a different culture, and it takes a lot of energy. Not only children, but the integration has to take place at the level of the parents. We're born. We were born in another country. So to come to Canada is a culture shock. But if we don't have the support, openness on the part of all Canadians who welcome us here, who can show us what Canadian culture is, then it's difficult. So if we don't have that inclusion, we talked about inclusion, it's very important. We Canadians, yeah, just a joke. When I was in Mauritius, I thought that when I arrived in Canada, I would only see white people, Caucasians. Of course, when I arrived, there were all kinds of colors. And I went to Surrey, and Surrey's described as a brown town, and my children thought that we'd taken the wrong plane. They didn't, are we in Canada or are we in India? Because they saw the diversity, people who were the same color as me. And it was great, actually, for us to see that it wasn't only a country of Caucasians, it was all these cultures. So diversity is very important, fundamental. But that's what makes Canada unique, that there is this culture, there is this diversity. It's really important that these newcomers be welcomed, that policies and resources be created to really welcome newcomers. And what I see, and this is a challenge, and it's probably a challenge that exists not only in BC but elsewhere, that is opportunity. We don't have the experience. So the employers need to give a chance to immigrants. They need to create the opportunities for them, because people arrive and they're often very qualified, and they really need to be given the chance to do something. We're here. We've left our countries. In Mauritius, it's pretty, and everyone said, are you crazy to be here? There's beautiful beaches, amazing ocean, white sand. And we left Mauritius in search of new opportunities in Canada to give our children and all newcomers this opportunity is really important.
Just listening to your anecdotes really reminds me, I mean, it makes me think that there are stereotypes to overcome as well, right? As part of this broader challenge. And James, if I can flip that one to you, I mean, I'm very curious to hear from you what you think the challenges are, what they have been for you in terms of creating a space, right, for that Indigenous knowledge that we've been talking about within the healthcare system.
Thank you. Well, I think being an Indigenous person and having challenges go hand in hand, unfortunately, so we're very used to dealing with them and adapting to that. You know, an example that I can give is when I first started my first day of residency, so I had, finished 11 years of school at that point, and I was starting being a real doctor in a hospital in Victoria in the labor and delivery ward. And this is for any health professional. You know, you've reached a level of you're almost done your training and you're starting to do your work. And before I was going to go in to deliver a baby, and I was all in my scrubs and did everything that people need to do when you're going to go deliver babies as a resident training physician, one of my coworkers, who is an allied health professional, I usually wear my hair in one braid when I'm in the operating room so my hair doesn't fall into somebody's body cavity when we're doing operations on them. And she used that, she pulled my hair and said, "You're not going into that room." And so that was in 2010, first day on the job as a physician. And so I often say to people, this is a reality for Indigenous people, and I would say a lot of ethnic minorities that are in this country is racism. I think that the media has a huge role to play in what it portrays on TV about different groups of people, and understanding what is the actual story that's going on behind the reality of the situation, and not just taking superficial views of things, actually digging underneath and asking the people themselves if they're defending a mountain or if they're defending water or defending different things, why are they doing that? What is the story behind that? Because there's so many teachings on this land that we have in our language, that we have in our ceremonies. We say, Ayamith Tahtan. You can read things on the land, on the sky, and the water. And there's many of those land symbols that are here in this province that people have no idea about, and that relate to our creation teachings, and that relate to our health. So the land, water, sky, all of those things directly relate to Indigenous health, and all of those things need to be incorporated into an office visit rather than just coming in and saying that you have a cold. There's so many things that go beyond that happen for Indigenous physicians and Indigenous clinicians working as professionals in their community.
Je trouve ça vraiment intéressant ce que James est.
I find what James is explaining highly important. It reminds me of a Nigerian writer who talked about the danger of a singular version of history. When it is told over and over, stereotypes become entrenched, and it becomes difficult to envision another version of history. Patricia, you recount history on a regular basis in the course of your work, and I'm just wondering, what is the public's perception? What are the kind of reactions that you're noticing? Or I hear you when I listen to you. Is that one reaction that you're getting? As a journalist, we always try to be as objective and neutral and impartial as possible. But ultimately, we are all human beings, and human beings want to recount how they see reality through their own lens. And so what people tell me is the following. In fact, most recently, I just started a new digital space out of our Winnipeg office. And the stories that we cover aren't breaking news, but we tell stories and experiences of people who are different. One example, a recent story that we published, was on circumcision. And it's something that I mentioned earlier. This isn't something that makes the front page, but this is something that a lot of people connect to or can resonate with. And if you're surrounded by Africans or Muslims or Jewish people, these are the types of discussions that you're having. And for other groups, this is not very topical. And so it was through my own interaction with people that I was led to be inspired and dig a little bit deeper and interview people on their own experience. And then people from the Muslim community as well as from the Jewish community were able to see themselves reflected in the story. And that's what diversity means. It's telling stories, different stories. And in order to do so, you have to surround yourself with different people. If you travel and if you go to a foreign country, you are going to see things that will inspire you in the course of your work and in your life. And as a company, as a corporation at CBC Radio-Canada, we have to leverage that. We have to count on people who have different experiences, different backgrounds. It's a matter of experience, not just color or background. It's in order to have different stories that truly reflect what diversity is and that mirror the myriad of stories that all Canadians harbor. My brother and my sister are some 10 or 12 years younger than I am, and they are living a totally different life than mine. And for Canadians who were born here, have a different experience from the experience that I have. They see life refracted through a different lens. It can be a question of skin color, but at the end of the day, we're all Canadians. So it's a matter of surrounding yourself with diversity and allowing an opportunity to tell those stories.
Just the breadth of challenges that different people face in different milieus and different fields. And Paul, we heard, just a moment ago, you were talking about some of the challenges as well. I want to talk about the light at the end of the tunnel, though, and maybe we'll use that to go to the next segment, because there are challenges, right? But change is coming. So Paul, arriving at this world now where Kim's Convenience exists, where it does happen. I mean, you're explaining how long and arduous of a road that was. Now that you're there, I suppose, in a way, do you feel like you're there? I mean, do you, the way fans relate to the program, do you hear from them that they feel inspired, that they feel that this is the beginning of something big?
I really hope so. I liken it to, you know, this whole push for diversity and inclusivity, not as being trendy or it being a buzzword. It really, I think we've let Pandora out of the box, the genie's out of the bottle. And I think audiences are way more savvy now, and they're expecting more. And you know, that's not to say though that anybody, you know, like anybody should just be given a series or a show, or you know, it is one of these things where we have to bring a level of craft as well to the table. I mean, I think Kim's Convenience also succeeds because we're all working to our maximum capacities. We are bringing excellence. We are setting a standard very high for ourselves. We're not just skating by just because of the color of our skin or because of our backgrounds. That's a recipe for disaster, because that's when the sense of entitlement sort of comes in. And I've had younger actors where they say, you know, I should have got that because, well, why? Do you have craft? Do you have this? Do you have that? No, it's because of the color of my skin. And so that's not enough. It's good, that's a great way to sort of open the door, but you have to bring a level of craft and commitment and excellence to that as well. And that's the one thing that I think really for Kim's, the reason why it has succeeded is because we are all striving for excellence, and we are all doing more than what's expected of us to just stay ahead of that curve. Because I imagine a scenario where if we had done Kim's Convenience, you know, our first season, nobody knew what to expect from us. And if the show wasn't very well executed or wasn't well performed or well written, we wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't be here. So I always say to younger actors as well, you know, it's one of these things where we're given very few opportunities to succeed. We're given even less opportunities to fail. And that's just the reality right now is if you're given this opportunity, you have to hit it out of the ballpark every single time. Otherwise, it's too easy to go, well, we tried. So let's move on. And I think now, hopefully we're inspiring, because of our work ethic, because of our commitment to the craft, that we're inspiring the next generation of artists and storytellers and people who want to be behind the camera and people who want to start making the stories and making the decisions for the stories, that we start to inspire them to start exploring these worlds as well. And you know, the thing is too, we are all Canadians at the same time. You know, it is our responsibility as well. Kim's Convenience isn't just about a group of Koreans who are just Korean. They are Korean Canadians. You see their journey as they immigrate to this new country and their struggles to try to integrate themselves into our society. And that's one of the strengths too, is the fact that we are Canadian. That is something I'm so proud of, that we're Canadian. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Oops, sorry, I've got all these things clipped all over me. We've got all these things that we are, you know, these stories that we're telling are about people trying to make a new life for themselves in a new country, not by just clinging to what they know or what their old country is, because they could have just stayed there otherwise. It's about facing these challenges and really embracing the fact that they are in a new culture, a new society, and they're trying to integrate and become Canadians as well. And that's the thing I think that really inspires a lot of people too, because it's an immigrant story, it's a family story, and so it is all of these things into one. And I love the fact that, you know, if it opens the door just a crack for other people to get through, that's great, because I think there is an untapped wealth of talent in this country, and they're waiting for that little break, and it's like a little dam, little crack forms, and then all the talent will just rush through. And it's exciting times. I think it's very exciting times now. But we have to be, especially with the CBC, I strongly believe, the leaders of this charge, this push. Let's be the trendsetters, not the followers. Because followers, they're always, you know, it's lame if you're a follower, right? It's more, be the trendsetter, be the leaders, be proud of what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's far more exciting, and far, you know, when you take risks, the rewards are tremendous.
Très inspirant.
That's very inspiring. I think you'd be all agree with me in saying so. Very highly inspiring to envision all of the screenwriters and actors and production crew are models within their communities, and they are in fact inspiring and training the next generation to enter that career and to follow such a path. But given the crisis of the media that we find ourselves in now, what do we do? How do we exploit the potential market? And I think it's just a pragmatic question that we need to ask ourselves. So let's set aside an issue. Padmini, you are from BC. I lived there for 3 years, and I experienced for myself how difficult it is to bring together Francophones outside of Quebec in one single community. People are still surprised to learn that there are Francophones in British Columbia. Now, of course, we have some 72,000 Francophones, and 3,500 who speak, 35,000 who speak French. So these are not pithy numbers. So how do you make sure that the Francophone community is recognized? Well, it's a battle that we wage every single day. Since I've been at the helm of my association for the last decade or so, we've really endeavored to make ourselves known. In British Columbia, I'd say that it is a real challenge. Francophones are always claiming our rights, and there is a deficiency of French language instructors and teachers within our school board system, and this is a challenge that many other jurisdictions face. What we need to do to overcome this is make sure that credentials can be recognized, work hand in hand with the province. We are lacking teachers in British Columbia, and yet we have many qualified teachers who are from all over the world, even from Mauritius. And as an immigrant, this is something that I say all the time. I have arrived in Canada, I have to feed my family, and after 1 year in school, I was bereft of any ideas on what to do. This is what teachers are telling me, and so teachers are also saying in the same breath, give me a chance to teach. So I'm not sure when we're going to be able to recognize foreign credentials. It's an uphill battle. But from one province to the next, for example, for teachers who are trained in Quebec, they have to redo their training in British Columbia. And that's a major challenge. It becomes very difficult. Even for our Federation of Francophones of British Columbia, we have a case before the courts, and I can't go into it too much in detail, but I can say that we are some 500 or 600 people within a community who need services and who are refused services because of the lack of resources. And often the response that we get from governments is, who cares? But that's our battle, and that's a battle that we continue to wage. I always say two things back home. So long as there is life, there is hope. But hope is the food of imbeciles.
Because you spoke so eloquently about the challenges that you have faced over the years. Are you making headway? Are you making progress? And if so, how did you do it, right? I mean, and this could be instructional for a lot of people, not just in healthcare, but just generally.
Thank you. I think that in terms of making challenges and headways, it's staying true to our values as Indigenous people, as Kisewatsuan, kindness, Agituan, love. Those things that Creator gave us, Kise Manto Yasaweona, are laws given to us by Creator. And that's how we're to live our lives as Indigenous people. I always go back to what my grandfather Jim O'Cheese, who's the chief of the Foothills Ojibwe First Nation. Their people came here in the late 1500s when the Black Robes, so the Jesuits, were destroying their bundles, things that they need to conduct our ceremonies, which are the foundation of our Indigenous education system, which is the foundation of our Indigenous law and governance system, which is the foundation of our Indigenous medicine system. And so when we think about what those represent, and that happened in the late 1500s, and now we're in 2018. When we reflect on the insult of those institutions of governance and importance for Indigenous people, then we can understand today why Indigenous people are overrepresented in so many things that the news typically reports on, because those have been under attack. So how do we rebuild those things, and how do we help Indigenous people come to a place where we're rightfully supposed to be in our own country, working together with the newcomers that came here, that we welcomed with open arms, that we used our medicines when the French people came here. In our language, we say, Mistigwinuak, the people that came on the wooden boats, the French people. How we used our medicines to help them because they were malnourished and sick when they got here. How do we help rebuild those institutions so that we can change and transform Indigenous health statistics, Indigenous education statistics, Indigenous incarceration statistics? And what role does the media have in playing that? In gathering those stories from a grassroots point of view, Indigenous people are excellent storytellers. We say to our young people, "Achimo," when our babies are growing up, to tell us stories, to tell us their stories, and we learn from them. If we go and learn from them and learn these stories, then we can start to see the transformation that needs to happen and having this good relationship that we're supposed to have as treaty partners. We've lived up to our end of the treaty. Now other people need to understand, what is it that your ancestors and your forefathers got into in this treaty relationship? Because for the most part, people don't even know what treaty territory they're on, let alone the obligations that come with that. And I'll leave you with this to understand about treaty. Our elders often do this, and that represents the depth of the soil that was supposed to be dug into, which is the depth of the plow. Now, I'm sure you've been to the mountains, and you see what's happening in the mountains. Can you ever see a tractor digging that far down, and can a tractor do that? And so when we think about Indigenous economic independence, the well-being of Indigenous people, if the basic foundations and principles of our treaty are not being agreed to, then starting to work and uncover those stories and really understand what that treaty partnership and relationship means, because we've always valued diversity and inclusion here on this continent. Transgender people, two-spirit people, women were always in positions of leadership. So that's not something that we need to learn. I think that's something that the rest of this country needs to learn and recognize and remember.
And if I could, I just want to reflect on something you said there as it pertains to the news media in particular, right? It reminds me of something that one of my CBC colleagues, Wabgishig Rice, said. I'm not sure if this is his original phrase or if he heard it somewhere else, but it stayed with me for a long time. And that is that we have to learn to be not story takers, but storytellers, right? And you know, it is such an infinitely complex issue, right? How to cover Indigenous issues in an appropriate way. But I think I'd like to think of that as a starting point to leap off of. So, but a lot of work to be done, that's for sure.
Thank you to all, really. Merci pour cette discussion.
Thank you very much for this discussion, so enriching. I can't wait to see the reactions and responses to some of the points that have been raised. Please don't go away, because I'm sure there'll be lots more to say. Should we check in with social media?
this was the panel discussion, but we do want you to ask questions. Everyone who's in this room and everyone who is watching online. So the hashtags, hopefully you remember them, hashtag CBC Listens and hashtag Radio-Canada vous écoute. We've got our social media presenters standing by right now. Mark, May, how's it looking out there?
Eh bien, présentement, on a des questions, en fait, pour la prise.
We have some questions for the president and CEO. What does CBC Radio-Canada, what could CBC Radio-Canada do to become more inclusive, Catherine? What part of the country does this come from? That's a great question. We're not sure. So, as you know, we have a diversity and inclusion plan for our employees. That's our starting point. But of course, at the same time, we're working on content and programming. For instance, we have on the English side a program called Breaking Barriers, and it's for people who may not have had the opportunity to make a second or third film. So for content, we start with employees, and then we try to find people in the communities with stories and to work with them so that they can tell their stories, and ultimately to work with the creators who come from everywhere in Canada and with people such as the ones you've just heard speak this morning. Thank you. Mark?
Next question is for Heather Conway. How do you plan to strengthen local CBC radio and TV services, especially in underserved communities? And we have a microphone coming to you, Heather.
Thanks for your question. We are strengthening our local services across the country. We have a new strategy called Content, Culture, and Community. It's part of moving beyond our digital-first strategy in local communities. We're investing in ensuring that we're doing not just news content, because I think a lot of the financial pressures of the last few years have had us focusing on just get the news done. And so part of our little bit more investment in our communities is allowing us to do a little more cultural content. We're also trying to connect with communities through live events. We've done a few, in particular for this, around the theme that we're talking about today. We did a great town hall on appropriation, Ever Okay in Saskatchewan, and it was an incredible coming together of the community there to talk about some difficult issues they'd been dealing with. We've done Facing Race. I think we're doing different things across the country to engage directly with communities. I think one of the things that CBC does so well, and Radio-Canada, is, to Catherine's point, we are a place where Canadians can have difficult conversations in a very civilized way. I think people trust our hosts, they trust our organization's fairness and balance to be able to have people come together and actually say, I have difficult things to say, I have difficult things to say, but it's a safe space for people to do that. So we're doing all of that, and we continue to invest wherever we can. Local is actually our connection to Canada, so we privilege it greatly.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. And I'd like to, okay, you read my mind just in the back there, because all of you folks who are here today, please ask your questions. We've got a lovely, very thoughtful panel of people here with a diverse range of experiences that would love to take your question. But Mark, you've got one.
We do. First, I'll get your name.
Cheryl McCumsey.
And Cheryl, do you have a question for anybody specifically, or what would you like to say?
No, this is directed to CBC in general. Our group has tried for a number of years now to try to get a story reported on the use of a very harmful neurotoxin called chlorpyrifos. I doubt very many people in the audience have heard of it. It has actually been reported in the U.S. media daily. The federal judge in the U.S. has ordered all forms of this to be removed immediately. Our city has abused this pesticide according to federal and provincial regulations. Health Canada has not reevaluated this as according to law since it was registered in 1969. There are 2,000 peer-reviewed studies showing how harmful this pesticide is. It is extremely persistent. It was sprayed well inside city boundaries. No other municipality in Canada currently uses this for mosquito control. There is evidence that it's ineffective. This is one of the reasons why no one uses it. And yet, why has CBC refused to report on this very extensive story that goes all the way across to the PMRA, our federal government, that has not addressed this concern? Alberta Environment, who has refused to take the reports, many varied reports, including the loss of 2 horses on someone's land that were killed.
All right, we'll let Heather handle that.
Thank you. First of all, I want to make it very, very clear that our editorial decisions in news are not made by management. There's an important distinction between editorial and management. That said, I'm always want to assure myself that our editorial leaders are, of course, looking at important stories of the day and making sure that their judgments about those are valid. You're in luck today because one of our editorial leaders is here, and I'm sure she'd be happy to meet with you. Stephanie Coombs, who runs our Edmonton station, and I'm sure she'd be delighted to talk with you about it. I will be clear, though, I am not going to tell her to do the story. I'm going to tell her to use her very best judgment as a journalist and as an editorial leader for CBC. Thanks.
I have another question from the audience. First, your name.
Kimo Mansouri.
Kimo, what would you like to say?
My question is, thanks for the discussion. It's more for all Canadians. What do we do as Canadians to actually be a welcoming community, welcoming individuals that makes immigrants safe, feel safe, and they are able to express themselves in the communities they are in. I have been here for more than 15 years, but I'm still considered as an immigrant when I'm a Canadian. When would I stop becoming an immigrant, then becoming a Canadian when I contribute to the Canadian community and Canadian society? When that is for all Canadians. If we start changing that, asking ourselves, when do you see somebody who is not like you and start considering them to be Canadian rather than an immigrant?
I consider you Canadian, Kimo.
J'ai l'impression, Padmini, qui a travaillé depuis bon nombre
I think that Padmini, who's worked with immigrants for a long time, you've met newcomers at the airport. How would you answer this gentleman's question? It's up to us as immigrants to become Canadians. When we came to Canada, first off, I always say we have to shut one door to open another. So in our mentality, by our way of thinking, it is up to us to become Canadians. Yes, I'm an immigrant, but I'm a Canadian immigrant. So that's our way of seeing things. Yes, we're Canadian. We're in Canada. It's not only Canadians, people here who must welcome us. It is up to us to have the open-mindedness to behave like Canadians, to think like Canadians, and act like Canadians. That's my response. It is true that we have to take our place and identify with Canadians, but this kind of conversation we're having today opens the door to discussion. We have to normalize the fact of being Canadian and having different kinds of hair. It's the normalization that's really important. And if I watch TV elsewhere, I watch British, English, British series, and in the series there is everyone. There are black people, Caucasians, Orientals, and it is not, they're not playing specific roles. They're just British people, and that's what's missing in CBC television. We need to normalize the whole thing. Where do you come from? That's not the question. We're all Canadian. We have to really educate people through our media. Let's make all these differences visible. In school, children, when they grow up, they have Mohammed, they have Babali, they have Jeffrey, and in everyday life, it's totally normal. But in TV, we're still in silos, and I think that's really important. I fully agree. In BC, I'm called the brown lady who speaks French and wears a sari. That's me. CBC must play a role in this respect as a minority francophone. We have to be given the opportunity to see ourselves. It's not only when there are things like when there are happy times, situations where people need the support. I met Jan and we talked about that, to see that CBC goes into the regions, doesn't stay in big cities. I know you were in, I'm glad to see that there is this effort. It is through you, CBC, that we will attain this visibility. And we have to be given this chance to say we're Canadians. We have to be able to see ourselves, but also to tell ourselves, to tell our story. Newcomers have to bring their story to the fore so that there's an incentive for people to become involved in volunteering in the community. Thank you.
Oui, on se retourne en fait.
Yes, we're going back to social media. We have a second question for Catherine Tate in English this time.
This erasure of history, worldview, perspective, it's important that education from and with Indigenous peoples takes place. How will you elevate Indigenous perspectives, voices better?
Thanks for the question. I think you've heard from everyone today, and especially James. Thank you for your really very moving comments and observations. We've been dedicated for some time to Indigenous programming, not just to bring Indigenous stories to radio or to television, but also to engage Indigenous peoples in our workforce, in internships, and to ensure full engagement of that community. We don't have an obligation from the CRTC vis-a-vis Indigenous content, but if we were to have such a thing, we would have already blown it out of the park. I can say we're very, very proud of the programming. If you tune into CBC Indigenous or on the sur le côté français aussi, we're very, very proud of our program. Much of it is award-winning, and we just look forward to keep building on the successes that we've had to date. Thank you.
Merci de votre réponse.
Well, and if I could just add, I mean, I think it's...
I'll sit down.
I'm over here. Yeah. I think it's easy to look at the work that CBC has done over the past 3, 5, 10 years and think, oh, well, that's convenient. CBC has latched onto this idea, and because we feel like we ought to. I mean, the work of CBC North stretches back decades, literally decades. I mean, broadcast across the territories, across northern Quebec, in I think it's 7 different communities, in a whole number of different Indigenous languages. I mean, this is work that we're so fiercely proud of.
If I can add, we're in the process of digitizing over 60,000 hours of Indigenous programming that was recorded for over many, many years and decades, and that content is now being oftentimes with stories from elders and being reused and rebroadcast to those communities in all of those languages. So it's an enormously, as a point of pride for the team here. Heather can add to it, I'm sure.
Sure, I can. I do think also, and it goes to some of the earlier comments that were made, hiring, Duncan McHugh and Anishinaabe to be the head of Cross Country Checkup, to host that show. That's one of the most iconic Canadian shows, not because he's Indigenous, he happens to be, but to Paul's point, being able to see yourself reflected in these kinds of roles is hugely important to your sense of what's possible for you. You might look at me and say, what do you know about it, white girl? I am a first-generation Canadian. I'm also lesbian. And so inclusion and diversity has been important to me in my life, and the strides that have been made so that I could see my place, and I can know that there's a spot for me at CBC. So, all of these questions resonate for everybody in very different ways. But they're all about, do I belong? Do I belong? And I think what we're trying to say to you at the CBC is, and Radio Canada, you belong. You belong here.
And that being said, allow me to say that question, however, will always be welcome. How can we do better? That is such a great and important question, and one that we need to answer every month, every year.
I'm staying with the mic because apparently the next question's also for me.
En fait, nous avons plus de temps pour les questions.
In fact, we no longer have any time for questions. It's a great pity. We could spend all day here, but I'd really like to thank all members of the panel, the curiosity from our audience. You can continue this conversation on social media. Now, I know a lot of negative things can be said on social media, but you have a possibility to use the hashtag CBC Listens, mot-clic Radio-Canada vous écoute, so you can continue your contribution to these exchanges. These are more than just buzzwords. We are now able to understand a little bit better the notions of inclusion and diversity. Thank you. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Andrew, do you want to say a few words? Oui, merci d'être là.
To be able to talk with you and discuss with you some of the ideas that we raise. Just a footnote that this broadcast, this webcast, will be archived online, so it can be watched for years and years and years on the CBC Radio-Canada corporate site.
And forward.
And,
yes. Si vous avez manqué les discussions d'aujourd'hui, vous pouvez les partager avec vos collègues.
And if you did take part with us, you can certainly share the link with your friends and colleagues. And perhaps this discussion will be applicable to other types of discussions.
Hashtag Radio-Canada vous écoute. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Thank you.